Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to dive into the story of a hero from way, way back. His name was Abraham. And, his story isn't about capes or superpowers. Nope, it's about a different kind of strength, one that can actually teach us a lot today. We're going to look at 4 of his most heroic qualities and see what they tell us about being a hero in our own lives.
So, let's start with a big question. What really makes someone a hero? I mean, is it about having some incredible strength or an amazing talent? Or is it something deeper, something in your character? Today, we're going to explore that by looking at 4 heroic strengths of Abraham that made him truly great.
All right, first up, let's talk about Abraham as a peacemaker. This first story is all about how he handled a really, really difficult problem, not with fighting, but with a whole lot of humility.
Okay, so here's the situation. Back then, your wealth was basically how many animals you had, and both Abraham and his nephew, Lot, were super successful. They had so many sheep and cattle that the land just couldn't support them all. There wasn't enough grass, not enough water, and their herdsmen started getting into fights over it. It was a classic, this land ain't big enough for the both of us kind of problem.
Now, here's what's so interesting. Abraham was the older guy, the leader. He had every right to just take the best land for himself. That's how things worked. But instead, he goes to Lot and says this, "Let there be no strife, for we be brethren." He cared more about peace with his family than about being right or getting the best stuff. That's a huge lesson right there.
And this is where you really see the difference between them. Abraham just selflessly offered Lot the first pick. He said, "You choose. You go left, I'll go right. No problem." But Lot, he looks around, sees this beautiful green, well-watered plain, and he snatches it up for himself. He left the less desirable land for his uncle. Yeah, it was a pretty selfish move.
So, after Lot made that selfish choice, you'd think Abraham would just say, "See ya, wouldn't want to be ya," right? But nope, that's not what happened at all. Let's jump into our next section and see how Abraham showed incredible courage to rescue the very same person who had just been so selfish to him.
Well, trouble found Lot pretty quickly in that fancy land he chose. A bunch of invading kings, led by a guy named Chedorlaomer, stormed through the valley, stealing everything. They took all the stuff, all the food, and they took all the people, including Lot and his entire family. It was a complete disaster for him.
When Abraham got the news, he didn't even hesitate. He didn't say, well, he got what he deserved. He immediately gathered his own small private army, just 318 men trained right there in his household. Now think about that. This wasn't some huge national army. It was just his own people. He was risking everything to go after a victorious king to save his nephew. And he didn't just rush in blindly. He was smart about it. He had a strategy. First, he sought guidance. Then, he teamed up with some of his neighbors for backup. And then, he launched a surprise attack in the middle of the night. It worked perfectly. He didn't just rescue Lot, he rescued everyone else who'd been captured too.
So after this amazing victory, the king of Sodom basically offered Abraham all the stuff he recovered as a reward. But Abraham said no. He wouldn't take anything, not even a shoelace. See, taking the loot was a victor's right back then. But Abraham wanted to make one thing crystal clear. He didn't do it for the money or the fame. He wanted all the glory to go to God. That's true humility.
So we've seen Abraham the peacemaker, and we've seen Abraham the brave warrior. But his heroism wasn't just for these big, dramatic moments. It also showed up in quiet, simple acts of kindness, especially to people he didn't even know.
Okay, picture this. It's the middle of the day in the hot, dry desert. Abram's just chilling in the shade of his tent, and he sees 3 strangers walking up. Now, in that part of the world, being hospitable could literally save a traveler's life. But Abraham, he didn't just do the bare minimum. He saw a chance to show some extraordinary kindness.
And just look at what he did. He didn't just wave them over, he ran to greet them, which was a huge sign of respect. He offered them water to wash their dusty feet, a massive comfort. He didn't tell a servant to get food, he went and picked out the best calf himself. And then he stood by and served them like they were royalty. This was way beyond just being polite. This was incredible hospitality.
And here's the kicker. These weren't just any old travelers. They were heavenly messengers. They were angels. Abraham's incredible kindness was so important, so memorable, that it was written down 1,000 years later in this verse. It's such a powerful reminder to always be kind, right? You just never know who you might be welcoming.
All right, on to our final point. Let's look at Abraham's 4th great strength, his leadership. And I'm not talking about leading an army on a battlefield. I'm talking about the day-in, day-out leadership of his own massive household.
Abraham was what you call a patriarch. So what does that mean? Well, he was the head of his whole tribe. That was a huge job. He was like the chief, making sure everyone was safe and had what they needed. He was the judge, settling arguments, and he was the priest, guiding their spiritual lives. He was basically doing it all.
And when I say his household was big, I mean it was massive. We're not talking about a small family here. It was a community of more than 1,000 people. You had his immediate family, all his servants, and all of their children. And he was responsible for the well-being and moral guidance of every single one of them. That is a huge weight to carry.
Now, what's so powerful is that this endorsement right here, this is what God himself said about Abraham. And this quote really gets to the heart of his leadership. He wasn't just managing people. He was building a legacy. He was trusted to teach his kids and his entire household how to live the right way long after he was gone.
So when you put it all together, you see that Abraham's heroism didn't come from just one big action. It was woven right into his character. It was this powerful mix of wanting peace, being courageous for others, showing incredible kindness, and being a steady leader that really made him who he was.
And that kind of brings us to a final thought. If you look at these 4 heroic qualities, being a peacemaker, a brave rescuer, being kind, and being a great leader, which one do you think our world needs the most right now? That's something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you something to think about when it comes to what it really means to be a hero.